Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slave, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, Zionists. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And the Gaza death toll, always in flux. I did a video about a month ago about the fact that the actual body count in Gaza is, which officially is stated at something like 38,000, was actually in the vicinity of 200,000. And this analysis came out both from a discussion with Ralph Nader and a article and analysis that came out in Lancet, and it discussed the fact that there's no way to really document how many people are being killed in Palestine and in Gaza, and a lot of the elements were very convincing to me that the death toll is astonishingly higher than what the official narrative is. And they talked about the fact that there's probably 10 or 20,000 people buried under the rubble that they have never found. The fact that there's no way to even keep track of the people in Gaza, particularly as they're shuffled back and forth the country in supposed safe zones. There's 17,000 orphans in Gaza. There's something like 20,000 missing or lost children in Gaza. And then mostly the fact that there's nothing left there to create any official figures. And that's because all the hospitals have been destroyed, all the universities have been destroyed, all the church mosques have been destroyed, all the morgues and hospitals gone. And so they don't really, unless they have, of course, in this bureaucratic age, unless they have some paperwork and some confirmation of a death, they're not entered into the numbers. And so just factoring in the amount of ordnance that Israel has dropped on Gaza and the amount of carnage that goes on day after day, the numbers have to be considerably higher than what they said. So I thought 200,000 was probably a reasonable figure. The fact that these numbers, these official numbers, keep coming out, and as the war, so-called war, progressed from the beginning, the numbers went up to about 12,000, and then they went up to about 28,000, and then they went up to about 35,000. And here, after 3 or 4 more months of carnage, somehow the figures still remain around 38,000. That's the narrative. And there's a couple factors in this. One is the fact that they have no idea what's going on the ground really, as far as numbers in either Israel or Gaza. And there's a motivation by the Palestinians not to acknowledge the real numbers out of embarrassment and having to admit that they can't protect their own people, and the actual carnage is sort of an embarrassment, and they don't want to acknowledge it. And of course, for the Israelis, they don't want the real numbers to come out, because if the world knew the real numbers that were people being killed in Gaza, then public opinion would sway even further against them. Although it's hard to imagine general global public opinion swinging against them much more. They seem to be getting away with a lot, as they always have throughout Israel's history. But I have to say, well, before I get into, once again, the real numbers, then of course we have the statist narrative that the United States and former President Joe Biden, I guess he's still the president, let's call him President Biden, and the statist narrative is all about, oh well, we need to have a ceasefire, and we're going to withhold some weapons from Israel because we don't really approve of the slaughter going on in Gaza. And as usual, that's all talk. That's all talk, because the Biden administration continues to arm Israel to the teeth. The military-industrial complex and all the arms manufacturers are making money hand over fist, just the way they like it. So for their interests, the longer the slaughter goes on, the longer this so-called war goes on, the more Palestinians that are killed, the more money they put in the bank. And so that's just the reality of the world. But the truth is that The U.S. is giving Israel $3.8 billion annually, and this is called foreign aid. But the fact is that with the so-called foreign aid, there's a caveat. It's not just a bunch of money that's handed over to Israel. It's a payout to the arms manufacturers because the U.S. on the surface says we give $3.8 billion every year to Israel, and then it's written into the contract that they get that money, but then they have to turn around and they have to spend it on U.S. arms and U.S. arms manufacturers. So it's just a gravy train. It's just a payout directly to the people that make these arms. The idea of characterizing it as foreign aid is certainly um, deceptive at best. $6.5 billion in aid has been given to Israel just in the last year. So during the course of this so-called war, they've gotten $6.5 billion, and I can guarantee you 6.4 billion of it went straight into the pockets of U.S. arms manufacturers, and that's just how it works. And then on the surface, of course, they talk about, oh, we need to have a ceasefire. Oh, those poor Palestinians. Oh, Israel shows some restraint. But in reality, the U.S. has sold 14,000 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. They've sent 3,000 Hellfire missiles. They've sent 6,500-pound bombs, and they've sent 1,000 bunker buster bombs. And let's remember the size of Gaza is mere miles, and the most densely populated area on the entire planet. And the U.S. is supplying this kind of ordnance, and Israel is using this kind of ordnance to pummel a population that's crammed into the largest open air prison in the world with that kind of high density. So there's no reason to think the numbers are anywhere near what they're telling us they are. That's just incredible amount of and like I say, these are bunker buster bombs. These are 2,000-pound bombs. These are 500-pound bombs. The kind of carnage and damage they do, and as we know, virtually everything in Gaza is being destroyed. Last count, I'm sure it's higher than that now, 175,000 buildings completely demolished. All the universities demolished, all the schools demolished, all the hospitals demolished. There's a story that just came out in the last couple of days that they're destroying the reservoirs there. So as if the Palestinians haven't suffered enough, now they want to make sure they can't get any clean drinking water, the very basis of sustaining life there, because Israel doesn't give a shit. And the more Palestinians that die, the happier they are. They find it amazing that Netanyahu can get up in front of Congress and talk about the barbarity of the Palestinians, knowing full well the astonishing level of barbarity that Israel is showing to the Palestinians. It's really unbelievable and astonishing and heartbreaking. And here we are, probably, at least so far, here we are, the most horrific event of the 21st century. It's almost seems like the horrors of the 20th century are small potatoes from what we're seeing here. And I also read another recent story that's not directly involved here, but it talks about the fact that we have Israeli real estate agencies that operate in the United States. One of them is called My Home in Israel. And they're basically selling land to people in America that have these ideas that they're going to get a nice piece of land somewhere in Israel, maybe build their retirement home or some shit like that. I don't know. But the fact is, they're selling Palestinian land. So they're over here peddling stolen Palestinian land to Americans for a real estate investment, which is also really disgusting. But let me get to the heart of this. I read a new article posted by Ian Welsh that talks about the fact that using pretty sound methodology from what I can see, that the real death toll of Palestinians in Gaza is probably closer to 500,000 to 600,000 or maybe even more. And so all the details I talked about as far as the death tolls in my last video, in the beginning of this video, are very sound. And I have to say this upgrade and the amount of death, 17% of the entire population of Gaza, sounds even more realistic. And he talked about all the same issues I talked about before as far as calculating and counting the dead and the destruction of all the facilities and all the people buried in the rubble. But he goes into some math and some methodology based in a historic context, and I deeply appreciate the historic context. And he talks about the fact that there's going to be um, residual deaths and associated deaths and long-term deaths far beyond the so-called military casualties. And so there's one formula that uses a 4 times ratio. There's another methodology that uses an 8 times ratio of just using historic examples of war scenarios, including Ukraine, and estimating using that methodology that if you use a 4 times ratio, which is very modest, you end up with a body count somewhere in the 300 to 400,000 zone. But once you use the 8% or 8 times residual deaths, which is more than likely in this scenario, and still kind of a moderate mathematical formula, you arrive at figures more like 500 to 600,000 Palestinians killed. I'm sorry. And then we have, with the reservoirs and the lack of water in Gaza, now they're talking about a polio outbreak as if these people haven't suffered enough. And then I also read a figure that 180 mothers give birth to children every single day in Gaza, which just gives Israel that many more babies to kill. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.